Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome back. And yes, we are back. I think you must have figured it out. It is 8:39 a.m. We were the victims of the Dark Lords. That, of course, is none other than Eskom. We were just we were just trying to, get our power back on, switch off the generator, and then get back to regular power. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for your patience. This is a story that is unfolding, in all industries and all homes throughout the country. So to our valued and esteemed listeners and viewers, thank you for your patience. But alhamdulillah, we are back. It is 8:40 exactly, and we are now joined by a dear friend. And that, of course, is you, Ayesha Kajee. You are a research fellow at AFRASID. We're looking at the issue around Sudan, which I'm not sure if I should be saying this, Ayesha. You can correct me. Are they in a crisis situation regarding the opposition being torn between not negotiating with military leadership and compromising on the road to hoped for transition? Assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yes, they are in crisis. They've been in crisis ever since the coup last year in October. And the economic crisis has certainly deepened since then. There is now, within the civilian forces opposing the coup, the anti-coup movement in Sudan, there is now serious division between the political parties that are part of the umbrella movement, Freedom for Forces and Freedom for Change, basically, and the grassroots movements, the so-called resistance movements, which are more in touch with people's emotions on the ground, who are resisting any compromise with the military, which essentially derailed the process of transition to a civilian administration by enacting this coup in October last year, sorry.
Just give us more context to this issue. The military having, of course, the coup last year, as you've indicated, what it's done to the country, I should imagine economically and otherwise, they've come to a standstill. What it's
Mhm.
going to cost whoever comes into power, whether they go into some form of coalition or whether the resistant movements, the people on the ground, take control. How's that going to play out going forward? Notwithstanding the fact that certain areas of Sudan are drought stricken. So they've got
Mhm.
to recover from that issue as well.
That's right. Drought stricken and very, very marginalized. The main issue in Sudan traditionally, even under the rule of Omar al Bashir, the issue in Sudan, the issue that led to the secession of South Sudan, the issue that led to the long-standing problems in Darfur, protests in the east, near Port Sudan, etc. The issue has always been that the margins of the country have been basically underdeveloped, ignored, to the detriment of those margins, and the power and the development has taken place along the center, along the Nile, if you will, and in areas like Khartoum and Omdurman particularly. That's always been the issue in Sudan, or one of the major issues in Sudan, and that has continued and deepened since this coup. There were attempts during the prime ministership of Abdullah Hamdok to reverse that. But of course, it's going to be a long process, given that there have been decades of underdevelopment. And of course, because much of the Sudan is in the Sahel region, in the desert region of Africa, it's drought prone. And access to water is a huge issue. It is what was one of the deep underlying causes of the Darfur conflict. There is also, of course, international interference because Sudan is a resource rich country. It is the world's only producer of gum arabic, which is an essential part of your everyday soft drinks, Julie. But it's
Wow.
also a huge producer of gold, of oil, and of many other minerals. So, as a resource rich country, there are always economic interests from outside wanting to gain influence and power in Sudan. These are a mix of external or peripheral factors which impact on what is currently happening in Sudan. But right now, the military has control. There's very little incentive for the military to actually transition to a civilian administration, especially given that the head of the military, General Burhan, and his deputy, commonly known as Hemedti, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, will probably face charges of genocide, or at least charges for the mass killings that happened during the Darfur conflict and more recently during the anti Bashir protests in 2019, which led to Bashir's ouster, and even more recently since the coup, when many civilians have once again gone missing, houses have been raided, people have been killed at point blank range, etc. And Hemedti is in charge of the so called rapid forces, RSF, they call them in Sudan. And he and Mr. Burhan would have to answer, probably under international law, for the atrocities that they've committed. So the recent attempts by the international community, including the United Nations, there is a United Nations mission in Sudan. These recent attempts to bring the various sectors together, the civilians, the political the parties, as well as the grassroots demonstrators and protesters, the military, etc., are doomed to fail, really, if there aren't going to be sufficient incentives for these high ranking military officers to actually leave power. In other words, they're going to want immunity from prosecution, which the protesters on the ground are not willing to grant. They're not willing to even negotiate or compromise with the military. Their slogan is the three no's.
Mhm.
No compromise, no negotiation, and no partnership with the military.
Absolutely. I have come across that as well. I'm kind of wondering, where does it leave the ordinary civilians? We have touched on the fact that there is a drought playing out there, undoubtedly, also famine in the rural areas. Those people are all but forgotten because there's this drama playing out. Chances that there can be a compromise somehow or the other. How long? Let's assume there is a compromise. What is the best outcome for the Sudanese people in terms of, and I should imagine as well, like South Africa and all other countries, all other third world countries, they too are mired in corruption. Government officials are corrupt are mired in corruption. Their pockets have been lined, and their hands are soaked in the blood of the people.
Absolutely, specifically the military. But now there are actually allegations from the resistance committees that the Forces for Freedom and Change, that's the umbrella organization of civilian political parties, are now too closely allied with the military. The best case scenario is that the resistance committees do get to join the internationally mediated peace process, for want of a better word, though there is no real peace in Sudan right now. But that there is a very distinct timeline, and not as long a timeline as there was in 2019, for a handover to civilian administration, that the chief members of the military council get some guarantee of immunity, because that's the only way they will leave power, and that in that transition period, the control of these military generals like Burhan and Hemedti on the Sudanese armed forces is systematically dismantled. That is very important, because right now the armed forces are very, very loyal, particularly to Hemedti. So that needs to happen, and it needs to happen within a short time frame. Added to that, any civilian administration then has to really address the underdevelopment of the margins, look at the drought, which is leading to famine, as you said, in the peripheral areas of the country, not just in Darfur, but also in the east and the north of the country and along the border with South Sudan. Um, Thirdly, get the economy up and running quickly. which means reopening the routes for oil to leave via Port Sudan. Currently, much South Sudanese oil is leaving via Mombasa because there have been issues around Port Sudan and lots of, as you said, corruption in that regard, and also breakages and disturbances along the oil pipeline. Oil is still Sudan's major export. And to get that running again will inject an infusion of liquidity into the economy, which is sorely needed because people, even in the urban areas, are actually living under very impoverished circumstances.
I can't understand why our government is not negotiating with them to bring some of that much needed oil our way. And in the process, the revenue for the Sudanese people. In closing, then, the position of Umar al Bashir, I think a while ago, a couple of months ago, when you and I spoke, and I might have my names confused here and possibly my countries as well, but you did indicate that he was missing. You're very concerned about his safety. I understand he is a personal friend of yours. So, what is the situation with him? So, my memory hasn't deserted me yet, has it?
No, it's not Umar al-Bashir. Umar
Is it
al-Bashir was the former president. He is
okay?
currently in a prison in Sudan, but it's the
Right.
former Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok who lived for a long time here in South Africa, and yes, whom I do regard as a personal and very dear friend. He was missing. He is now under house arrest, unable to
Okay.
talk to and contact with the outside world at large. So I've been unable to contact him, but other people amongst the professional sector in Khartoum have assured me that he is relatively okay. He was badly treated while taken into detention, but that he's relatively okay and currently under house arrest.
Okay, that's good news indeed. Sorry for the slight confusion there, but not too bad. The brain is not all that muddled or muffled as I thought it might have been.
Not at all.
Aisha, finally, my closing question to you is where does Sudan sit with this ownership issue, which is playing out in North Africa? Regarding the ownership of the Nile waters, and we do know that the future wars are wars regarding water. People, nations are going to be fighting for the ownership of water.
Yes, there has been tension between Sudan and Ethiopia, particularly over Ethiopia's construction of its GERD dam. It's a huge dam that essentially leaves much of the Nile waters as they flow downstream um, much shallower, much less in terms of volume and capacity. And Sudan has traditionally been or sided with Egypt on this issue, and Egypt has been particularly vocal on this issue of Ethiopia's damming of the Nile. So there are military tensions as well as water and economic tensions currently between Ethiopia and Sudan. However, both Ethiopia and Sudan are currently mired in internal conflict. And so the issue of the water wars has been placed to some extent on the back burner in both those countries, although it's a key factor in terms of geopolitics, in terms of international relations between the two countries. Both of them are currently so mired in internal conflict. Ethiopia, because of the situation in Tigray right now and its relations with Eritrea, and Sudan, because of the coup since October last year, which has essentially, as I said earlier, totally derailed the road to transition to to a civilian government from the military-led one, and is really causing great hardship for Sudanese people on the ground, as you mentioned, in the rural areas of the country, but also, in the cities as well, including in Khartoum, because the cost of living has soared. We know it's soared all over the world, partly due to the war in Ukraine, but food scarcity is now becoming a real issue in Sudan. And ironically, even fuel scarcity, given that Sudan is such a large producer of oil.
Asha, that's where we leave it. Undoubtedly, in future programs, we are going to start talking about the water wars in that part of the world. Always wonderful having on the show. You keep safe, keep well, keep us in your du'as. Salaam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Keep me in your du'as as well and the listeners
Ameen.
as well, inshallah.
Amin, Amin, Tuma Amin. That was Ayesha Kajee, Research Fellow at AFRASID. It is exactly 8:54. In a minute, we'll be joined by my colleague Inayat Wadi. He has he's going to be talking to us about his show tonight and also the issue around the South African 20 or T20, however it's being referred to. Let's hear what's happening there.